Hello and welcome once again to the Progressions of Consciousness Internet Radio program. I'm your host, Keith David Henry, and we're here as always on the Community Listening Network, www.clnradio.com. Okay, we're going to get back into the Progressions of Consciousness chart that we've dealt with off and on the program. And I also want to let everyone know that in the next several programs, we've got a couple of interviews coming up. We'll be talking in one of those programs with Leah LaChapelle of the Unzipping Reality radio program, which is the namesake of a book that she has written called Unzipping Reality, and I'm going to be very excited to present that program. And we're also going to have Jill Mattson back, right, who's an amazing person, a beautiful spirit, and she's heavily involved with music, sound, vibration, and she's also an artist. And, you know, I've heard testimonials, many testimonials of the healings that have happened by people just listening to her music. And I think it's a very profound tool for healing. And you probably want to visit her site at jillswingsoflight.com and download some of her free music. And if you like what you hear, obviously you'll want to purchase some of her full CDs. You won't be disappointed. Now, last week, as always, I was talking somewhat about religion, and again, the one issue that I have with religion or any type of community initiative is that the idea of community tends to be counterproductive to the individual development path. Because whether or not one wants this, the nature of community is that people tend to all try to act the same way or move in the same direction. And even if that direction is extremely good, relatively speaking, instead of having 1,000 people moving in one direction, it's eminently more productive to have each of those 1,000 people moving into their own direction and contributing to the whole based on their individual findings. It's a much speedier process of creation and unfoldment. So for those of you who don't understand, I really need to make my stance clear, which is the Aquarian age is bringing with it that whole dynamic and push toward individual unfoldment. And the Piscean age, which dealt, primarily with hierarchy and groups and leaders, while it had its place and is still very valuable in many respects, that is not the optimal means for unfoldment at this time. Because what you're doing is you're trying to use an energy that is essentially passing away, and you're ignoring the new energy that is designed to empower our move into the rest of our lives as a species, as individuals, as a planet, and indeed as a universe. So one of the things that we've talked about in the last program was dealing with our emotions. And I think one of the things that we have neglected, as I said in the prior program, is really openly and candidly handling those emotions. For instance, in most societies, it's really an uncomfortable thing for a person to stand up and say, oh, well, I'm feeling sad because of something that happened, or I feel jealous, or I feel jilted, or I feel angry. While there may not be any written prohibition against that, if a person actually were to stand up and say that openly, they would be looked at as a pariah of sorts, and everyone would, wow, how can they feel that way when in secret they themselves have often felt that way, but they don't feel the freedom to express it. Now, if you're feeling a certain way, to ignore it is ridiculous, just based on the fact that the feeling is there, the feeling exists. But if you're feeling a certain way, you're feeling that way for a reason. There's something there that needs to be examined. And I'm not suggesting that you stand up in the group and, air your dirty laundry. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is you need to acknowledge that and look for the underlying cause of it. Think about it. Let yourself feel it. If you conclude that it's useless, throw it away. And that's not easy to do, but there's a difference between throwing it away and suppressing it. Throwing it away means allowing yourself to feel it, understanding the reasons you're feeling it, and processing it fully, and letting it pass through you psychically, emotionally, and physically, allowing it to be. Now, I do believe that there are some emotions that are misguided or unfounded, that if you had the correct information about it, it would be easier to deal with. For instance, a person that feels like they're at a point where they're just ready to end their lives because everything is just going so badly and they can't live with it anymore. If they really understood that all things were as they should be, and I'm not saying if somebody told them that, because that very seldom helps, just go and teach somebody something, but I'm saying if they really understood it, then the likelihood that they would be sad is very much lower. But even if they did know that and believe that, the sadness is still there. So what do you do with this emotion while your psyche is catching up with the facts? Well, you've got to process it. You don't want to suppress it, because that's counterproductive. And the reason is, if you suppress it long enough, it just sinks back down into your subconscious, and you think you're over it when all you've done is suppressed it and made it stronger and a more destructive influence in your life. So I'll probably be talking about the idea of individuality for quite some time in our program, in the upcoming programs. And when I look at people that are simply associated with this station, for instance, I mean, you have people like Michael Tessarian, who has gone in directions where there are many people that are saying, oh, that guy's a heretic, he's crazy, what in the world is he talking about? And when you listen to what he's saying, whether you agree with it or not, you cannot ignore the tremendous amount of research that went into his conclusions. Yet you still have people that are animately opposed, and many of which are opposed because of their belief in the Bible, which was not researched at all. It was simply a group of writings that were gathered over history and slapped into a book, and for the most part declared by the church to be the Word of God. I don't know any Christians, although I'm sure there are some, but I don't know any Christians that have done a serious research into the origins of the Bible. Now, the ones that have done serious research into the origins of the Bible, they're not talking. Because if they start talking, boy, we're going to have a mess on our hands. But you have people like Michael Tellinger, who is looking at various archaeology and looking at where the evidence leads in terms of the origins of humans. You've got people like Jill Mattson that are reaching into their individual persuasion toward music and pulling out the plum of healing and empowerment. And I'm sure that all three of these people, and many others, not just these three. I mean, for one, I mean, it's hard to ignore Gary and Ingrid Purefoy, who have forged out with this, what I consider, an unprecedented venue of internet radio programming, where they're bringing together all of these unique perspectives And, I can't say that I've ever heard Gary or Inger ever say, well, we don't want to hear that perspective on this program because we believe this or we believe that. You don't hear that. And on a lot of radio stations, you're kind of pigeonholed. There's only certain things you're allowed to talk about and certain things you can't say. And that's pretty much the model of community. And I really can't applaud Gary more and give him higher kudos than I have for his pioneering approach to his programming in that respect. And, I had a conversation with my brother the other day, and he was talking about how my twin brother, by the way, he was talking about how, he's really, watching videos, and he's listening to, various radio programs, and he's getting a lot of really good information from the programs. And it kind of tickled me when he said, I'm listening to this stuff, and I'm thinking to myself, and these weren't his exact words, but this was the sentiment, which I'm sure many of my listeners can identify with. So listening to this stuff and saying, well, I sort of already know that. And it may have been the first time he heard it, but he sort of knows. So, even some of the things that might be considered new, that, and I can attest to this on my own, that I've heard. And I said, well, I already knew that. How is that? Well, it's because we're all tapped into source. And even new information, when you hear it, once a person receives that information and processes that information, it is now available to the whole via source. So it may sound familiar, but there's still that one area, that one direction, or perhaps many directions, that each individual has within them that bears developing. And it's not going to happen if you've locked yourself into a community of thought, no matter how high level that thought is, no matter how powerful that thought is. If you're part of the community that's all pursuing a specific way of thinking, when will you ever get the opportunity to develop your own intuitive and imaginative connection with Source and bring to the whole that quote-unquote new thing, so to speak? That's where we're going. And it might be easy to the casual listener of my program to think that I'm saying to throw out teaching, and that we should not be educated, that we should not be reading books, we should not be listening to radio programs. I mean, that would be kind of silly, since I've got my own radio program. But that's not what I'm saying at all. And let me give you a for instance of where I'm going. Years ago, I used to do tarot readings. I used to do them quite often online. And sometimes people would get angry with me because they were busy asking me, am I going to meet someone? Am I going to get married? Am I going to be financially successful? Where am I going to live? And things like that. And, from the very beginning, I would always explain to them that's not the kind of reading I do. And there are many who do that kind of reading, and I think it's valuable and good. But the reading I always did was I would take the tarot and use the tarot as a means of, deciphering where the person was energetically, so that I could give them intuitive advice on how to develop their own intuition so that they wouldn't be dependent upon tarot readings. So if you throw out tarot readings, then I'm in a hole too. I'm not saying you throw it out. And also, if you're a tarot practitioner, how can you throw out tarot reading? That's what you do. That's part of your profession. So, no, let it never be said that I'm saying that people shouldn't do tarot readings, or that people shouldn't go to church, or that people shouldn't be a part of these community types of endeavors. The bottom line is that the intuitive part of you, that internal imaginative connectedness to Source, is the most powerful entity that exists. And somebody said, well, I thought Source was the most powerful, or God, or whatever. But see, that's the point. You are Source in its totality. Each one of us is Source in its totality, in its perfection. But we are a unique manifestation of Source. So, people talk about, becoming spiritual, and I've mentioned this, and you've got all of these, people go to seminars and everything. I think it's great. I love it personally, just for the road trip alone. I love being on the road. I love, going to seminars where, people are discussing esoteric things. I love running into people that are just unique, and a lot of them are really weird, and that's kind of a turn on for me to see somebody that's just really eccentric and weird. It really, gets the juices flowing for me, but, teach his own. But you always run into these people, and you love talking to them because they always say something that kind of gets you thinking, and I love that myself. So I'm not for a minute saying that that people shouldn't be doing these things, but don't get in the trap of thinking that this person that you're listening to has more of a connection to Source than you do. They don't. They don't have any less than you, but they don't have any more than you. What they have is a unique gift that at this moment, or at the next moment, or for a month, or for a year, or for 2 years, that you want to gain access to for the sake of coming into your own unfoldment. I mean, what the heck good is it having, 500, Edgar Casey's running around? I mean, that would be kind of cool. But how about having, one Edgar Casey and then 499 other people with completely unique gifts, talents, and strengths and insights? Do you see where I'm going with that? So I was talking to my brother, and he was talking about, I hear all these things and I kind of know, but he said, there's something else. I don't know what it is, but there's something else that is out there that I feel like I need to connect with. And I knew exactly what he was talking about. What he was talking about was that Kentness, that unique Kentness. Well, Kent is my brother's name. That unique himness that he came to experience, that he came to develop, that being himselfness that he needs to tap into and explore. And that can take some time, but I also know by experience that one of the ways that happens is when you do read a book, or when you do go to a seminar, or listen to a program, or get a reading, or hear a channeling, that, I mean, you could be listening to the thing for an hour, to the channeling or whatever it might be, and everything you hear is great and beautiful, and then the channeler will say, one sentence that completely changes your life and kind of gets you moving off into your unique direction. And I can't underestimate, and neither should any of my listeners underestimate, the concept of unification. Because a move toward unification, a move toward spirituality, these are wasted and redundant efforts. You can't become any more unified. We as a species, as physical beings, we can't become any more unified than we are. You can't become any more spiritual than you are. And one of the things I like about what Michael Tsarian was talking about, and I hope I get this accurately, because when you repeat someone, you risk not being accurate with it, but I think I pretty much got what he was saying, which was, many of the quote-unquote spiritual exercises, the lethargy, I guess activities, that we do, meditation, visualization, yoga, etc., all these things, that people have the wrong idea about what these things are for. They think these things make you more spiritual. And it wasn't until I really heard Michael Tessarian talk about this that I understood it, because all of my life I used to wonder, why are people doing all these things? Like, people go to church and they bow their head, or they take communion, or they meditate for hours and hours, and obviously some people with great success, and I used to wonder, what are they doing? What are they trying to do? And, well, this is how you reach enlightenment. This is how you become one. But do you really want to become one with Source? You really want to become one with Source? I'll tell you how to do it. Take a couple cinder blocks, tie them around your ankles, and jump into the ocean. Guarantee you, you'll be one with Source very quickly. I mean, the idea is that we didn't come here, we didn't manifest as physical beings to experience spiritual oneness and unity and enlightenment. We were already there. Why come here to do that? Why be so obsessed with doing that? We didn't come here to do that. We came here to experience subjectivity and individuality, and to experience it through this illusion of what is known as physical reality. The idea of all of these so-called spiritual practices is not to make you become spiritual. The idea is to remove and diminish the many, many psychic weapons, or the results of the many, many psychic weapons that have been used against us to keep us from understanding who we are. Meditation doesn't make you anything. Prayer doesn't make you anything. Somebody says, well, when I pray, I feel close to God. Then pray as much as possible. I'm not telling you to stop that, but I feel close to God when I'm eating Cheerios. I mean, I feel close to God when I'm watching a football game. I feel close to God when I'm pissed off at my cat for jumping up on the table and trying to eat my dinner. So, I mean, I don't make a distinction between spirituality and this physical reality, in the sense that, I need to escape one and get to the other. My only distinction is that here I am as a discrete manifestation of Source, here to experience something. Well, what is it? Well, I'm living it. I'm experiencing it. Now, if you can actually grasp and understand and believe that in your heart, then, to be honest with you, there will be a lot of negative emotions you won't have to deal with, because there's no need for them. But if and when those emotions do pop up, sometimes your mental knowledge of a thing, or your understanding of a thing, does not stop the emotions, because they're just popping out, and they're saying, hey, here I am, deal with me. So, in our quest, so to speak, for enlightenment or unfoldment, the key to remember and really hold strongly in your thought and in your heart is that you cannot become more spiritual or enlightened, more powerful, or more a part of Source than you already are. What you can do is become more aware of that connectedness, but not from a standpoint of experience, because once again, you're not here to experience oneness with Source. Oneness with Source already exists. Oneness with Source is a given. Is nothing you can affect one way or the other. The mass murderer, the serial rapist, they're as connected to God as the Mother Teresas and the Martin Luther Kings. There is no difference, there is no substantive difference between their connectedness to Source. It's just that one person chooses one path and another person chooses another path. So for a person to make the sole subject of their lives to reach a level of spirituality is really a result of ignorance as to who we are and what we're here for. And I can't stop thinking about, things that Jesus said, except you become as a little child, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. And one of the things I mentioned last week where Jesus said, when I go away, the Holy Spirit will come and teach you everything that you should know. And then later Paul came back and said, well, no, basically Jesus was wrong. You need pastors, teachers, and you need all these offices to teach you what you're supposed to do. Now, I don't know, I'm kind of leaning with Jesus, and, I'm certainly not going to say that, it's bad to have a teacher, and everybody here's just saying, well, when the student is ready, the teacher shall appear, and you've got all these people roaming around looking for teachers, and I just get this funny picture of a guy walking through, down a crowded street, and he sees a guy coming, taps him. Are you my teacher? No. Okay. Then he walks a little further. He sees somebody else, taps him. Are you my teacher? I'm ready. That seems a little silly, but I mean, and once again, I am a teacher. That is my forte. That's one of my gifts, and I love teaching. It's one of my great joys in life. But if I ever felt that someone was esteeming my teachings as more important or valuable than what they on their own could glean from their own internal connectedness with source and imagination, I'd probably curse at them. I'd probably do something to piss them off so they would leave me alone, just for out of general principle. Because there's nothing more beautiful and powerful and relevant, frankly, than self, than me, than I, than the individual. That's the whole ball of wax. So in thinking about the Aquarian age and where we're going, and in thinking about many moves by the New World Order, and they're saying one world government, and we're going to have everyone under one umbrella, and you have the New Age movement saying, hey, let's gather all religions together and let's all be one, and you have people saying, hey, let's have peace in the world with everyone coming together and being one. And certainly none of those things that any of those groups are saying are negative or bad things. I mean, think about it. People say, oh, well, the New World Order wants one government so that they can, control things. But, the idea of a single government is not a bad thing. The idea of one world being under the leadership of a single sentiment in itself is not a bad thing. It's just old. It's old. We're in a different age. And as I said before, and a lot of what I say is repetitive because it is so important, I think, that people get this, that I'm being repetitive about it. But the concept of coming together as one is sort of like two snakes saying, hey, you know what? Let's be snakes. And one snake says, well, what do we have to do to be snakes? And one says, well, I hear, there are various things about snakes, but what they don't realize is that, different snakes have different, characteristics. So what kind of snake do you want to be? And that may seem like a far out example, but, all humans, we have things in common, obviously, but we're also all completely different. And the ideal that I or anyone else should be beholden to or feel obligated to say the same thing as somebody else is saying, for us all to gather and all agree on the same thing, while that in and of itself is not a negative thing, it is not the direction that is going to take the human species comfortably into the Aquarian age. It's that individuality. And here's the paradox, because as you reach into that individuality, as you reach into that subjective connection with source, you run smack dab into the unity. You can't get away from it. You can't circumvent it. Not that you'll want to, but I'm just saying, it comes with the package. It's part and parcel of the package. My name is Keith David Henry. You're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness radio program, and we are on the CLN network, www.clnradio.com. Now, in discussing, this whole ideal about the emotions, I'd like to share a recent experience that I've had, because I'm finding it to have been, such a pivotal event in my life. On many fronts. On the one front, it's something that I've never experienced before. I had no mental context, so I had no compartments to put it in. I had nothing with which to analyze it. So for me, anyone that has known me for any amount of time has got to think that was really a strange place, and that's the only really way I can characterize it. It was a very strange place. It was a place where I was both happy and sad at the same time. Not intensely, but I mean, how can you be happy and sad at the same time? Well, I've never experienced that before. I mean, I have nothing to compare it to. I don't know anyone who's ever gone through that. So I'm sitting here for days and days and days trying to analyze it, trying to figure out what to do with it. And I'm thinking, what the hell's going on? So, and there have been other times in my life, for instance, where I go in on a personal, I call it a Gemini hiatus, where you just don't deal with anybody or anything, and you just kind of go into your little cave of retreat. So I figured, well, this is a good time to go there, So I went into there, and for days and for days, I turned on the TV, and I was kind of watching it and not watching it. And, as I was watching it, I was also, thinking about my new book, which I'm writing, which is called The Enlightened Ones, and it's a science fiction novel, and I don't want to spill the beans about what it's about yet until it's almost done, which, I'll probably be finished with it within the next couple months. But, I was thinking about that, sort of writing it in my mind. And I was also thinking about my circumstances. And, I was thinking, you think about these different programs that are out there. For instance, most New Agers or people that are metaphysically inclined have seen this movie, The Secret. And, I actually call that, advanced Pentecostalism, because it's basically exactly the same thing. You believe something and you receive it and you confess it until you get it. And if you don't get it, it's because you're not believing it and receiving it. That's sort of the short version, and there's a lot more to it. And every single person on that video I respect highly as a metaphysician, as a professional, and as a spiritual person, and anybody listening to me that would ignore something that is giving them results, well, they have medication for you if you do that. On the other hand, if you're doing something over and over again and you're not getting results, one of the things that societies stress is that, well, you must be doing something wrong. So, I'm thinking about that, and, ever since I saw that movie, The Secret, I really had trouble embracing it fully, because it reminded me so much of my Pentecostal experience from the standpoint of the teaching of Pentecostalism. And let me qualify that very quickly, and let me follow that up by saying that the entirety of my tenure in the church was absolutely more Zen than Christian. I never prayed for anything. I mean, I prayed for people that, if they were sick, that they would be well, or if someone wasn't saved, that, the devil leave them alone, I rebuke you, Satan, and that sort of thing. But I never asked God for anything. I was just happy and content with where I was, and I found all this stuff just was happening to me. I was getting things that I didn't even ask for. And it was so amazing, and it was one of the things that really made me question my walk, because, week after week, people would come up and say, well, everybody pray for me because, I want this and I want that. And there's nothing wrong with that, because, one of the scriptures says, you have not because you ask not, so by all means ask. But the idea was propagated, and not just subtly, but it was said outright, that if you're not getting what you're praying for, it's because either you don't believe it, or because you're doing something wrong, or because you're asking, quote unquote, to consume it upon your lust. Well, look, dude, if I ask for ice cream, there's only one reason for ice cream, and that's because I like ice cream and I want to consume the ice cream upon my lust for ice cream. So certainly, if I'm asking for something physical, I'm asking so that I can experience the joy and the physical benefit of that thing I'm asking for. But the whole idea was, well, you know, you're doing something wrong if you're not getting what you want. So, you know, certain things would always happen that I would always look at and wonder about. And, you know, one of the things we had is testimony service, and somebody would stand up and say, well, God gave me a wife. And, you know, I just thank God for the wife that he gave me. And it turns out, you know, that person was in the church for 10 years. And after looking for the perfect woman, you figure, well, maybe this is God's will. And then, okay, well, God gave me a wife. You know, what I wanted, God didn't give me, but this is all right. Or somebody says, well, God gave me a house. Right? That's beautiful. You know, it's great. And, you know, some of the things I'm saying now are some of the things I said in my last sermon in the church, which is, you can guess, is why I never preached there again. You know, and I made a comment about the person that says, well, you know, God gave me a house. And, you know, it's a $100,000 house, and over the course of my life, I'm going to pay $1 million for it. And I'm thinking, wow, God sure is a tightwad, man. I mean, you know, if God gave me a house, I want him to give it to me, you know, at the very least for what it costs. You know, so it turns out God gave me the house, but the banker is getting all the money. So in essence, God gave the banker all that money. You know, so, you know, I'm poking fun a bit. The point I'm trying to make is, you know, there's nothing wrong with believing that God is behind your life and that God is doing things for you. But the reason a lot of those types of things happened was because people were trapped in this paradigm of having to confirm that the teachings that they are under are working. When that's just life. People that aren't saved get wives. You know, drug dealers get houses, you know, without paying any interest. They just buy the thing outright, you know. These big financiers and bankers that are cheating people, you know, buy, you know, $25 million house cash, and they've got several of them around the globe. You know, so I'm not trying to diminish a person's faith, and that wasn't what I was doing in my sermon. What I was trying to point out was that to be trapped in any dogma or doctrine is a way of stifling your individual insight and creativity. And in my case, you know, as I say, one of the reasons I never asked for anything is because I didn't have a chance. I was so busy, you know, following my bliss and doing the things that made me happy, that I wasn't really, I just never had any great needs, and things just came to me. So getting back to my story, so here I am, you know, in this situation that really, from the standpoint of, you know, something that you would, you know, go into a booth and vote that should happen in your life. Well, this is not one of them. This is not something that you sit down and say, hey, you know, when I'm a certain age, I want to be in this situation. But here I am in this situation. Now, it's not the situation that was making me feel this very strange emotion. It was, you know, one of the things I was questioning was, well, am I not doing what I'm supposed to do? You know, am I not, you know, having the faith that I should have? Am I not moving in the direction? And every time I would ask that question, I realized that, no, that's ridiculous. And it took me a bit of time to realize that I wasn't feeling fulfilled the way I wanted to feel fulfilled, because I was so busy trying to apply a teaching that wasn't for me to my life. I was too busy trying to conform to a doctrine that in my particular case had become counterproductive, that I had moved into kind of a twilight zone, no man's land, for which I had no precedent. And the reason I had no precedent is because, you know, I'd never been in a place, really, where I was locked into or questioning or wondering whether or not I was in the will of God, so to speak. I can't remember a time in my life, except directly after I got out of the church, where I said, well, am I in God's will? And we talked about that before, and we probably will talk about it again. But other than those years where I was wondering, oh, am I going to go to hell because I'm not going to church, and because I've studied and found that a lot of the things I'm believing were really manufactured and had no basis in reality and were someone else's writings, and that the stuff had been changed. So there was that murky area where I was just discovering. But there'd never been a time in my life where I was coming from the core of my being with everything that I was doing, and there were great results and there was great fulfillment, where I was asking, am I doing what I'm supposed to do? So having later come to the place where, okay, of course I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and of course I'm where I'm supposed to be through various means of self-examination and consideration. And I also talk to several people, and I'm listening to various tapes and seminars and whatnot, and just that's what I do in the course of my research and whatnot. And from that, I gleaned certain nuggets that made me realize that, hey man, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. And the reason you're in this weird no man's land is because you're not being yourself. You're not being Keith Henry. You're being some dude that you think you're expected to be under certain circumstances. I want you to get that. The idea of being what you think you're supposed to be based on what someone else has said eventually will come back to bite you. So the key is to develop your own individuality, be comfortable with that individuality, and let yourself be your own standard. Do not be locked in or tied down to someone else's standard. The only way to accomplish this, the only way to stand firmly in this, is to realize that in your life, if you pursue your bliss, you pursue your joy, and you live in the moment, that you will always be exactly where you should be. And if you have to deal with certain questions or emotions, excuse me, then so be it. Don't suppress those emotions. You have to examine them. Now, here's the thing. If I had not examined those emotions, which I honestly can't classify them, I can't categorize them. At one point I got a reading, and the reading was very valuable and very powerful. And after the reading, I was like, yeah, I'm on the right track. But it wasn't until later, and very recently, that I even realized what that reading meant specifically to me. The reading actually was a bit prior to my no man's land world, because after I got the reading, I was like, okay, so I'm on the right track. I didn't hear anything that I didn't already know, so to speak. I mean, it was kind of a confirmation, and okay, so now I'm going to keep going. But I was still expecting results based on something that was not uniquely me. It was not anything that I'd ever practiced in my life. I was always an individual. I always leaned towards my intuition, even though I preached the teachings of the church, and I participated in everything that you're supposed to do as a minister and as a churchgoer. But I remember all those years I was involved, there was always, you know, like you get the picture of this little devil on one shoulder and a little angel on the other shoulder. Well, there was always this little man on one shoulder saying, something's wrong, Keith, something's wrong, something's wrong. And I never 100% fully committed my heart to it. I continued to reach inward, and I studied the scriptures to try to make sense of it all, until at one point, after studying and studying and studying and studying, I said, hey man, you know, you just need to, you know, call, you know, what was saying, call a spade a spade. And that's pretty much what I did in my last sermon. And it's pretty much the lifestyle I adopted after that. And I said, well, hey, I'm just going to go in my own direction. And every now and then I would, you know, kind of look over my shoulder and say, God, you're not going to zap me, are you? You know, you're not going to hit me with a lightning bolt or send a plague because I've been disobedient, are you? And, you know, the lightning bolt never came, the plague never came. You know, and I do remember something, you know, that I do need to be candid with you about. And that is, you know, I do recall that, you know, years ago after I had left the church, it was such a, you know, I can't tell you the kind of emotional stresses that are involved with, you know, leaving a social system where you're pretty much in the forefront of the order. And then when you leave, not only are you no longer part of the order, but now, you know, the other people are taught, oh, well, the devil has him. And, you know, he's been deceived and whatnot. And, you know, who do you turn to? Well, you know, I sort of turn toward metaphysical circles, but, you know, people are people. And, you know, no matter where you go, you know, there are good people and there are screwed up people, so to speak. You know, and that's not a character judgment. You know, that's, you know, people think the way that they want to think and they go in their own direction, and, you know, there's nothing you're really ever going to do about that. So, you know, so I started, you know, getting involved in things that I really, you know, in retrospect, would rather have not gotten involved in. But even having gotten involved in them, the reason it went so far is because I had no context. I had no one to really help me. And when I really got deep, you know, I would always go back to, you know, my sister or brother for help. And, you know, someone asked me, well, you know, why did you go back to that? You know, if they're churchgoers and they believe in God and everything, doesn't that mean that, you know, maybe you did leave God and you should go back? But, you know, the reason I went back is because they were good people and I knew that they would never try to hurt me. And that's a very valuable thing. You know, but as I started to get a grasp on things, it became clearer and clearer to me that no one is going to save me. No one outside of me is going to be the ultimate architect of my destiny. It is me and me alone who has that particular commission. And when I started looking at the Aquarian Age, and this is one of the reasons that those books, the books that I've written, have really come into that category of architects of the Aquarian Age, that I began to realize that I am the architect of my life, and that my abundance and that my happiness really has nothing to do, per se, with what's happening around me, in terms of the quality of what's happening around me, because you can't judge the quality of something until the end of it. And when I think of so many situations I faced in my life in the past and how they seemed so grim, and when I came out on the other side of it, I said, wow, you know, if this had not happened, there's no way I could have emerged into the place where I am now. And I thought about it over and over again, and I was like, you know, I couldn't have planned it better. And the fact is, the higher self is the one that planned it. And I was right. I could not have planned it better. So if you are looking at your circumstance as something that's grim, as something that is weird, or you can't understand it, or you can't quantify it, or it doesn't match anything that you've ever experienced, or it seems like you're on a bad path, a path that nothing good can come from, well, you have to ask yourself one important thing. Are you being being you? Are you exploring yourself? Are you reaching into your own individuality, your own creativity, your own intuitiveness? If the answer is no, then where you're headed, whether or not if you come out valuable, the process is going to tear you apart. Because everything is happening for a reason. And what you're going through is happening because you determined that it should happen. But you don't have to be miserable going through it. The misery is something that you choose. But by the same token, if you're feeling bad about it, if you're feeling miserable, if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling depressed, and you suppress that, well, what good does that do? If you can honestly realize that there's no need to be depressed, then fine. But if you have to say, oh, well, I'm not supposed to be depressed, I'm not supposed to be sad, I'm not supposed to be anxious, so go away anxiety, go away sadness, well, that's no answer. And in my particular circumstance, because the particular emotional experience was something that I'd never faced before, I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't have any choice but to examine it and delve into it and try to figure it out, which, you know, wasn't a very good thing in retrospect. You're listening to Keith David Henry on the Progressions of Consciousness radio program. This is the CLN Radio Network, Community Listening Network. You can hear my show from Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern Time. I also want to take a few minutes to talk about my website, www.don'treadthisbook.net. And on that site, one of the primary things on that site are the references for the 3 books I've written. The first book is Don't Read This Book If You're Right. The second book is The Invisible World and Other Obvious Things. And the third book is Terra, T-E-R-R-A, Return of the Divine Feminine. So on that site, you'll find all the references for all 3 books. And I encourage you, if you're a person that's looking for information that is typically not made available on, you know, network television or, you know, in schools or whatnot, you'll find such a wealth of information on that site. And I encourage you, you know, vehemently encourage you to go look through that site. And there's something on there for everyone. As I said, I'm also working on a 4th book, which is a science fiction novel. And as soon as that is available, I will make it be known. In the the few minutes that we have left, I want to really clarify again, you know, some of the things that you'll find on my website. And you know, a lot of that stuff might be classified under the category of truthers, you know, the people that go around exposing all these conspiracy theories. And you know, I think that it's important that people realize what the purpose of this information is from my standpoint, is to kind of, you know, wake people up, not to scare people. But in light of all these things that are being done, that knowledge and understanding of what is being done is only one part of the puzzle. You know, to roll up your sleeves and think that you're now going to do battle with, you know, the Illuminati, so to speak, which is a misnomer, because they're not illuminated at all. All they have is a few tricks and some magic that they've been using to hypnotize us, so to speak. But they really are not illuminated. But some of the tools that we have been given to really bolster and strengthen our individuality and our unique connectedness with Source, these esoteric tools are the tools to be used. And one of the things I like about Michael Tsarian is, when you get all these people who are going to rise up in arms and overthrow the New World Order, as pretty much using the tools that they have provided for us to fight them, which is kind of a ridiculous proposition. So just from the standpoint, for instance, of religion, which teaches that these esoteric sciences such as astrology, alchemy, Wicca, magic, tarot, things like that, that we should not use them. Well, these are the tools that we've been given to develop ourselves, where the influence of people like the Illuminati and the New World Order, where we can escape those things. And they're telling us, oh no, those are bad, and we believe them. And they're saying, no, instead, buy some guns, dig out a trench under your house and start storing food. Well, that's not going to work. That's not going to help anything. What's going to help and what's going to be the greatest weapon is that development of individuality. Because let me tell you something, once you realize who you are, and you start to develop yourself, it's infectious to people around you. You don't have to say a thing. They're going to feel it, and they're going to thrive on that energy. They're going to be, to some degree, they're going to be awakened. And so begins their own search for truth and their own search for that individuality. I mean, many people are aware of all these FEMA camps that are cropping up all over the country, and they're empty now. But who do you think they're for? Well, they're for dissenters, my friend. They're for the people that figure that they're going to, fight in the New World Order. And if you think revolution is the key to changing anything, just look at every revolution and every war that has ever happened on the face of the planet, and then tell me of any one of them that has had substantive and lasting change. I mean, you look at the world today, it's worse off than we have ever been. So what has been the value of all these wars and revolutions where millions of people have died? Well, the value has been to the military-industrial complex that, among other things, has been selling weapons to both sides. And a lot of this has just fed the bloodlust of those that are behind a lot of the nefarious things that are going on this planet. So don't be in despair about what's going on. Just realize what's going on, and realize that once you look around to all the alternatives, to all the things that you're being told that you need to do to be successful, and once you realize that none of this stuff is going to work, there's only one place left to look. There's only one place left to go, and that is within yourself, within your own autonomy, within your own connectedness to source, within your own individual imaginative power, which on an individual basis has the entirety of the power of infinite source. You don't need improvement. You don't need to become spiritual. You already are. Hope to see you next time on the Progressions of Consciousness radio program.